It was timeshares at Normal.
This is such a nice day.
Okay. All right. It is 7 o'clock, and I will call the meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Kaneland District 302 Board of Education, and it is Monday, April 11th. We would like to inform all board meeting attendees that this meeting is being live streamed and archived for access at any time by our community members on the internet within 24 to 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion. This meeting is open to the public in accordance with the current mitigation plan that was approved by the Board of Education on the 14th of February, 2022, and masking is optional tonight as our schools were all in the green zone at the time during the notification time. So if you will all join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And a roll call when you're ready, please.
Mrs. Witt.
Here.
Mrs. Junk.
Here.
Dr. Lawler.
Here.
Mr. Mankivsky.
Here.
Mrs. Simmons.
Here.
Mr. Gonzalez and Mr. Carey are absent.
Okay, with 5 members present, we do have a quorum tonight. Are there any items that board members would like to move from the consent agenda to new business? Okay, hearing none. So before we approve the agenda tonight, we do have an amendment to the agenda. We need to add a topic under closed session, and that is, the topic is under section 2C1, which is the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, specific individuals who serve as independent contractors in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or specific volunteers of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee, a specific individual who serves as an independent contractor, or a volunteer of the public body, or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. So we would like to add that to the closed session topics, and then I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mrs. Junk.
Aye.
Dr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. Mankivsky.
Aye.
Mrs. Simmons.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Move on now to board and superintendent salutes. Dr.
Yes,
Layden?
with the long time between board meetings, I was remiss in March not to mention last week was Assistant Principal Appreciation Week. So I would like to retroactively say how much we appreciate our assistant principals. And fortunately, we have 2 of them here tonight, Brian Zerfis and Emily Waller. They'll be presenting shortly. Would like to say a note of appreciation to them and their work, along with here at Harder Middle School, Chris Weiss and Nicole Bacalis, and then at the high school, Kristen Faber and Carrie Oslager. So please join me in thanking our assistant principals for their hard work and dedication. And their work putting together the presentation of the student handbook that you'll see under J3. That'll be coming shortly.
We extra appreciate you for that.
That was all I had. Thank you.
Okay, great. Dr. Fuchs?
I don't have any, thank you.
Okay. Tonight's consent agenda contains the following action items: the approval of accounts payable and payroll for March 2021, the approval of the treasurer's report for March 2021, the approval of minutes of the March 14th, 2022 regular meeting, the approval of resignations, terminations, and employment of staff, the approval of destruction of audio recordings from closed session meetings from October 2020, the approval of the fuel bid, the security services bid, the electricity bid, the natural gas bid, and the approval of the Illinois High School Association membership. It also includes the following informational items: the Freedom of Information Act FOIA report and the student suspension data report. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
A roll call, please.
Dr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. Mankivsky.
Aye.
Mrs. Simmons.
Aye.
Mrs. Junk.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. This is the first opportunity for public comment during our meeting tonight. There are 2 opportunities. now and at the end of the meeting. The board values public input to inform our decision-making and to provide information and insight into what is happening throughout the district. Board meetings are held to conduct the business of the Board of Education and are required by law to take place in public. However, they are not public forums. We use the public comment section as an opportunity to listen to our stakeholders. For that reason, the board does not enter into a debate or respond to questions spontaneously or without proper investigation and deliberation. In most cases, concerns or questions requiring follow-up will be referred to the superintendent. If you choose to speak publicly, we ask that you do so at the microphone. State your name and the village of residence or your association with us for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less so that all who wish to speak may have that opportunity. Public comment is a maximum of 30 minutes with a 20-minute total length of time for any one subject. You are encouraged to seek a private appointment to discuss matters concerning individual students or staff members. While public education can be an emotional issue, and understandably so, the board strives to maintain a certain level of decorum at the meeting. Those who speak are expected to maintain a tone of courtesy and civility. And there are no people signed up for this first public comment, but I will open it up to the floor. Are there any public comments? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on. There is a sign-up sheet out front if you, during the meeting, think of something you would like to speak about, and you can sign up out there. So at this time, we'll move on to new business, and the first item is the Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, MTSS, Structure Overview.
Yes, as Dr. Atkins shared a little bit of the overview during the staffing presentation in March, wanted to bring back more information to our Board of Education on just more details so the board as well as our community members are aware of the shifts and what's taking place. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mumm and Mr. Raleigh.
Good evening. Thank you for your time in hearing us on our MTSS structures. This is exciting work that has happened over the course of the last couple of years with a very collaborative kindergarten through 12th grade group of educators and interventionists and coordinators to talk about a shift in our current response to intervention, or RTI practices, towards more personalized and proactive multi-tiered systems of support for our students. The first slide that we have up for you is just covering a bit of that MTSS philosophy. And overall, we are still intervening with students when they are showing a gap in their progress, their achievement of their regular classes. A little bit of a difference between our MTSS philosophy here in Kaelyn versus what we are used to with our response to intervention is that our RTI has typically used interventions that are readily available, and often those come as computer-based interventions or other purchased interventions, and they're not always responsive to the targeted gaps of students. Over the last few years, we have really honed in on all of our staff identifying what our learning targets are, and we've done that through I can statements. Our most recent data from that SIP collection shows that that has become really embedded practice. So our teachers are starting off their lessons identifying what the students are going to be learning. Those I can statements are directly related to our scope and sequence curriculum maps and our reported standards. That shift then with MTSS comes with intervening proactively or more proactively with those I can statements, targeted interventions for very specific learning gaps that we are seeing in the class. It falls in line with the work that we've done with personalized learning for the last several years, and it allows for our interventionists to be involved more in co-creating personalized goals for students based on their need. It centers heavily around feedback. We've done a lot of work with a feedback cycle and collaboratively working through a feedback cycle with our staff and with our students. And that's probably the biggest shift in philosophy is it's involved in the classroom when at all possible, but it still builds in for historically what we have referred to as Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions, some more of those intense interventions, but really that shift in how do we target specific goals to our students based on specific targets that are happening in the classroom, and we set that goal. That timeline looks a little bit different, where typically an RTI, response intervention cycle, might be 4 to 7 weeks, somewhere in between there. With MTSS, a student might need a quick 2 or 3 day boot camp type intervention. They may need a longer intervention. It all depends on what the interventionists and the classroom teachers have decided for that student goal. This work was done through an MTSS steering committee. It was a large group, I want to say probably 30 or 40 educators across the district. We really had an eye-opening moment where we started by sharing what each grade span between our elementaries, our middle school, and our high school have been doing. We've looked at a lot of the commonalities that fall through all of those grade spans, and sometimes where there are some differences based on courses, course availability, staff, but we really honed through what we have available, what our key non-negotiable tenets are that Dr. Mumm is going to share here briefly, developed a handbook for guidance for our staff, and we're really excited to put this into practice next year and continue to see how we can intervene with our students and help our students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mumm, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about those non-negotiables.
Like Mr. Rowley said, one of the first things we did was make our K-12 non-negotiables. It's probably the first time RTI was very grade span specific, and we knew going into the shift to MTSS, we wanted to make sure it was purely K-12 and we all had the same focus. It may be implemented slightly different based on the developmental level of the students in the grade spans, but the non-negotiables would be our foundation, and that was our first task as the steering committee. You can see them posted on the screens in front of you. Some of the key pieces of it, I believe Mr. Rowley really did a nice job of covering. It is based on proficiency tables. It is based on those I can statements. And for students knowing and defining what proficiency looks like, and either self-identifying, I need some support in this, or I need some enhancement in it, and I want to move even quicker or at a faster pace. MTSS would support both remediation as well as enhancement through the practices at the grade span. Some of the other highlights of the non-negotiables are truly that it is flexible. Like Mr. Rowley said, in the past we had distinct cycles with distinct weeks that we as educators set, but the MTSS structure really needs to be dependent upon the individual student. And what would that look like? What is their support or enhancement need? And then the approximate time that would take with progress monitoring along the way. And so that flexibility of my MTSS structure could look completely different than the student next to me is something that we knew as a committee we really wanted. We also wanted to make sure that we had a full wraparound team that included our instructional coaches, our behavior facilitators, our MTSS staff as a partner with our classroom teachers. We did not want it to be a standalone, leave my classroom, go to RTI, come back to my classroom, but to have that collaboration and fluidity among the classroom experience, the MTSS experience. Pushing in as many of the interventions in a co-taught model was definitely a goal, but we understand in some grade spans and some student schedules, it still may need some pull-out service, but connected back to that classroom. And so these were kind of the tenets that we started with. It was the steering committee, as Mr. Rowley said, started about 3 years ago almost, and with COVID took a bit of a pause, and so when we came back to the non-negotiables that we had done pre-pandemic and looked at them again and reaffirmed them, we're like, yes, that is what we wanted. And so we knew we had some great non-negotiables to focus our work on. As I said just a couple minutes ago, RTI or MTSS, I don't know how many times I'm going to do that over the course of the next year. MTSS really is a diamond shape. We often hear about the RTI triangle, but MTSS is a diamond. It really focuses on students that might need intensive enhancement support, students that are progressing faster in a learning path curriculum, as well as some that might need to go back and look at I can statements, proficiency tables, and may need content delivered in a different way in order to remediate that content. And so MTSS will support on both ends of that diamond. And so we're trying to really break that visual of the triangle and go more towards the diamond as we move forward. So K-5 overall is really looking at, as you approved during the staffing plan, looking at per school what is listed on this slide, having a coordinator that looks at the data trends, shares with the staff, guides the different grade levels and the MTSS interventionist with, have you tried, how can I support you? The coordinator also links to the instructional coach and the behavior facilitator and kind of co-discussing, is there something in Tier 1 that we can assist with, and then give ideas for Tier 2 and plan for Tier 3 as well. There will be 4 MTSS interventionists that will be in a co-taught structure. Right now, we have them listed as 1 for K1, a second one for K1, and that being very flexible. We know over the course of the last 2 years, a lot of our 5-year-olds may not have had preschool experiences that they previously had because of the pandemic. Some did not go through a preschool experience or did more in-home. So we're flexible in using 2 of those MTSS interventionists initially as just kindergarten for that initial transition time based on the needs of the school. Eventually, we're looking for 1 at kindergarten, 1 at first grade, or a K1. And then we'll have another interventionist at 2, 3 as they make that transition from reading to learn, or learning to read in 2nd grade to reading to learn in 3rd grade. And the transition of math concepts is a pretty big jump in that 2nd to 3rd grade. And so that's the perfect place for 1 interventionist to kind of go between those 2 grades. And then in our K-PASS model in 4th and 5th grade. You can see that our related service staff, our social work staff are still a huge integral part of MTSS. They have been seen as RTI interventionist in the past, and we want that to continue, that is always a service outlet as well. By push-in lessons to Tier 1, push-in with a small group, or maybe a pull-out with a small group as well. The team definitely includes our instructional coaches and our behavior facilitators, as I previously mentioned as well. You'll see the foundation of K5, as you probably have guessed, because I think I've alluded to it a couple times. The basis of it is co-teaching and making sure that the MTS interventionist is a part of that grade level team in every way. Co-planning, co-creating, co-intervening, looking at data analysis, really making determinations for students' needs on every point of that diamond with the team. So they are kind of that 4th or 5th member of the grade level team that they are assigned to. Co-teaching consists of 6 models of co-teaching. It is the same 6 models that we have been doing with special ed and gen ed. It's just done in a team instead of a one-on-one pair like we do with gen ed and special ed. They are part of our KDAB, which is our Kaelyn Data Analysis Blitz. It's a process where the classroom teachers and the team really dive into data, they do the analysis, and they really come up with goals on student achievement to improve the overall learning within their grade span. And then having team and collaboration with the special ed teachers as well. We still will have special ed teachers as part of co-taught classrooms, but as I mentioned, it is a one-on-one pair with a special ed and a gen ed teacher. So you may have a classroom that has a special ed co-teacher for a reading portion and the MTSS interventionist at the same time, or maybe for the math portion, depending on the different needs of the students. And so that team has to flexibly work together in really looking at the data, monitoring the data of the students, and then determining what would be the best support for our students. As you can see, co-teaching, I just did a little bit of comparison because we did have that question quite a bit, even with our staff. What's the difference between co-teaching MTSS and gen ed special ed? And again, it's that team concept. I'm your co-teacher with all 3 or 4 sections. So I might divide my time over the course of an hour of math. I may be in all 3 sections 20 minutes, or I might not be in one section because the needs of students are predominant in the other 2 sections, so I split my time there. Or for this week, I'm just going to be in the one section the entire time, and I may bring the student with me from another section. We make that determination as a full team, the interventionist with the grade level teachers. Where typically in gen ed and special ed, it is based on the IEP goals of the student, and it's a pairing that lasts the whole year, depending on where the student is within the placement of the class that has the IEP. So there are some similarities. They do follow the same 6 models, but definitely differences among co-teaching and MTSS and special ed. Some of our final key structures are really the opportunity for co-planning and being part of that team. I was so excited the other day, just a total side note, we had a grade level come over for an escape room field trip, and I saw one of the staff members and I said, well, I'm glad you could come, and I almost thought their child was maybe in the class. And she's like, I'm one of the team members. Of course I'd be here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. She is an RTI staff member right now, soon to be MTSS. And I thought, that's it, they get it. It's a full concept. What that team does is what that interventionist does. And the amount of intervening and one-on-one student work she had during that experience was probably even more intensive than something they may have done in the classroom. So that is the concept of truly they are part of the team. They will have monthly huddles as a grade level team formally to talk about data, talk about progress monitoring, identify students that might have needs that have arose over the course of the month, and identify students that probably don't need any more support that next month. There'll be weekly huddles with the MTSS team, and that's where the coordinator's role becomes very essential. As the interventionists come back from the grade spans and share, here's what we have going, here's a barrier we've run into, here's a celebration. The coordinator collects that, looks for trends, determines maybe there's a professional development need here, plans that professional development, or gives them resources and techniques and ideas to try as well. That weekly sounding board is going to be essential in the system. You can see over the course of the next couple slides the typical roles of the classroom teacher, the interventionist, which we've somewhat spoke about, and then the coordinator are very similar. The classroom teacher, very similar, looking at that data as a team, knowing the students, owning the data, and really being able to recognize the needs of the students with that interventionist. And then as we talked about, the coordinator role is also to look at some data trends, and as a data determine what might we need in an upcoming school improvement day or institute day. And so along with kind of managing their building needs and being that building sounding board, the coordinator also is definitely a bigger picture look at the entire grade span and district. And they will be meeting with the Ed Service Department monthly to have those conversations of needs as well. So before we go on to 6-8, are there any questions for K-5? Again, K-8, very similar, but little differences because of the grade span and the way that elementary students don't have 8 teachers a day. They typically have 1 or 2. Yes?
As part of your interventionists for the MTSS program, behavior management specialists, where do they fit in?
The behavior facilitators are part of that team as well. Right now, they're shared among 2 buildings, so they're not in a building every day, or they may not be there all day every day. And so they are the resource for the MTSS interventionist, who is the co-teacher with that grade span. So the interventionist or the classroom teacher may put a request in with the behavior facilitator to say, hey, can you come in and model this lesson? Or there's a group of students that we would really appreciate seeing you interact with them and doing a small group that we can watch and model and learn techniques ourselves. And they will remain in that role. They do attend many of the data meetings as well as the huddles, as many as they can get to when they're shared between 2 buildings, to kind of listen in for what ideas they may need to push into classrooms to do. So a huge part of the system for sure.
Mostly as a push-in service?
Absolutely,
Or
yep.
Push-in?
Yeah. Because the idea of the behavior facilitator, if you guys remember when you approved them, is not only the benefit of servicing students at times, but to service students with intent that the teachers can see it modeled, so the teachers can take on that role and responsibility and learn the skill as well. So it's always a PD piece embedded in that facilitator position.
Quick question about data. You've mentioned data 1,000 times, I lost track, which is great. Is it teacher-driven data? Is there student-driven data? What does that look like?
A little of both. We have our common formative assessments that are common for any job alike across the 4 buildings. And that's kind of our key data that we start with, because then you have a comparison of other sections in the school, but then other schools as well. But then you also have, as students are progressing with their proficiency table in their learning path, you have the individual student work and reflection time, where a student may be coming and saying, here is what I believe I'm showing proficiency in, but you may observe as the teacher that they are not. And so any of those data pieces, whether it's from a feedback conference that's co-constructed between the student and the teacher, whether it's from a student reflection, whether it's from a student piece of work, or is a common assessment that we have used that we can compare across the sections, all of those will be part of that data analysis. Also in the data analysis, the teachers look and say, here's an area that I think we need to improve, and do we have a current assessment that tells us what we need? And if not, do we need to create one specifically for that goal?
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Rowley.
Thank you. As we go through the 6-8 and then eventually the 9-12 structures, we did a lot of work to align this through the district. So some of these pieces may seem similar to elementary when we go through the middle school, and then from the high school, it's going to seem similar to the previous 2 grade spans. Probably the largest shift, though, is seen here at the middle school. So our current practices and what we've done for some time now is we've had 2 interventionists here and 1 coordinator. Interventionists typically serviced students during one of their exploratory times with a computer program, 1 for reading, 1 for math. Again, they've done a wonderful job with that, but it has been very reactive. It's been very tailored for a set amount of time, and we're looking to expand to a much more personalized approach to intervening with students. We have grown our MTSS team, so we will still have our coordinator, and we'll explain what those roles look like. We will have 6 interventionists, 2 per grade level, and then alongside with those interventionists, and those interventionists have middle school certifications across several different content areas. We have our related services team that will have deliberate setup meetings to work with our coordinator to look at student data. We will have our behavior facilitator as part of that team here, as well as our instructional coaches that are all looking at the whole child and the full picture, not only of student achievement, but as Dr. Mumhead said, what opportunities do we have to continue to grow our staff in intervening with students in the classroom? We want to make sure our kids are in front of our excellent teachers as often as possible, as much as possible, and then if we can push in those interventionists into those classrooms, that is our key goal. We also know that some students will need a little bit more intensive of those interventions, and what we have not been able to capture in the past has been what have been RTI, really that tier 3 level, the student that is getting a small group intervention, but then an even further intensive intervention with a change in some teams and a change of adding interventionists. We have created that time where should a student present with that further need, we have that time built in. Again, structures look fairly similar. There's some names. Our elementary schools have been doing some of that data analysis, data blitz teaming. That has not, it's happened here at the middle school, but you'll hear some different names. So there are weekly meetings. There are curricular meetings here at the middle school. There are small team meetings, large team meetings. So these 3 structures kind of point out how and when those teams will be together. When we set out with this, it was a key non-negotiable that our interventions are going to be driven by data. Some of the data at the middle school is very similar to what Dr. Mumhead said, looking at classroom summative assessments, teacher assessments, student work. What we have typically used in the past has been a benchmark iReady assessment 3 times a year in the fall, winter, and spring, which is still a data point, but we will have several more coming out of the classroom that we will use based on our curriculum scope and sequence. Our MTSS team will have the opportunity in their schedules to meet with those teams on a weekly basis to have very targeted and specific conversations about students and student need. We will also have the opportunity for a large team, monthly meetings for that full MTSS team to meet with staff members, and then additional time set up where just the coordinator and those MTS interventionists will have time to look at what interventions are necessary. As Dr. Mumhead outlined, the coordinator possibly looking at professional development opportunities, best practice in intervention. So there's time for some of those small groups and then a larger whole of interventionists to meet and really look at student data that is driving the need for these interventions. The number 1 key role is our teachers. Our students are in front of them for the vast majority of their day, so our teachers are our number 1 point to intervene with these students, to understand where they're at. Like I previously said, the work that we have done with our I can statements in aligning our clarity of targets, of learning targets, of objectives, to aligning our daily practices, our assessments. All of that picture comes from our classroom teachers. So they are a huge part of that. They're going to be working in their team meetings with interventionists, and then when possible, our intervention team will be working alongside of them in the classroom. They're going to be co-creating goals with those interventionists based on student data, and they will be the first point of contact. They probably have the longest relationship with parents, so they're a communication piece. They're the first point of contact, and then doing that on-the-spot daily progress monitoring, either formatively or summatively, of how students are progressing through. Our interventionists, again, this is a little bit different than what our experiences have been in the past. Again, it is going to be proactively meeting with these teachers on a daily basis to see what the instruction is that is going on in those classrooms, what are the goals of the classroom, and then how do we individualize a intervention plan for either an individual student or a small group of students while that learning is happening in the classroom. If there is a need for further pullout, that is built into the schedules of our interventionists. They do, again, have time to meet as a team of 7 with the interventionist and the coordinator, and then a larger team involving our instructional coaches and our behavior facilitator. Our coordinator serves a very similar role to what Dr. Mumm had outlined. They're managing the data, they're managing and identifying trends that they're seeing. That trend could be within a classroom, it could be within a small team or grade level, it could be within the school, and we start to identify when we see some of those larger trends of what whole-scale professional development or intervention is needed. They're maintaining, like I said, they're maintaining that data, they are communicating to teams of teachers, they're communicating to the interventionist on what cycles are happening, how long they're set to happen, and what results are coming back. With that being said, any questions for our middle school structure?
So I had one. I think at the older grades, it's probably more likely that you might get a student-initiated request. What would a student-initiated request for enrichment look like? And how would that be handled? Like, would they ask for, first of all, you have to evaluate, the actual, or teachers would probably know.
Mm-hmm.
But is it something like if a student says, hey, I really liked this unit, I'd like to have further reading in it. It could be something that simple, or it could be, hey, it'd be a really enlightened child to say, hey, this is too easy for me and I'd like something else. How will that be handled?
That's a great question, and I think there's a couple different avenues to approach that. As far as truly accelerated classrooms, we have our Challenge ELA in our course book and our accelerated math in our course book. There's conversations on-ramping for students, but those typically fall towards the end of 6th grade, if looking towards those opportunities for the next grade, and that's not what we want to do. I think the more and more that we start to build our proficiency tables and have that, the intent of those tables is to outline exactly what that learning looks like. So a student can see in 6th grade ELA, here are the expectations for a given reported standard. They will also have that opportunity to look at what that learning looks like at a 7th grade level, and that's where that intervention starts to happen. It would be it would take a new advocacy on the student's behalf, but that is the work that we've been doing the last couple of years in teaching students how to advocate for different structures. So some of that groundwork has already been laid in teaching students how to do that. It then becomes, and this is one of the key reasons that we needed to add additional staff, it then becomes how do we tailor that goal. So that goal for a student looking to accelerate or looking to go beyond maybe what the majority of their peers are doing would come from the teacher and the interventionist looking at those proficiency tables and say, okay, here's what this 6th grade standard looks like and this 7th grade standard looks like. Here's how we can build an intervention plan for them. Here's what success criteria would look like. Here's how we know that they're proficient in those. So it would be based on those tables being built and those indicators of what success looks like for those. But that groundwork has been laid through our SIP goals, and it will continue to progress forward. The systems in place, the forms, the logistics of that, who that goes to would probably be routed through our coordinator, who then would contact the interventionists and the classroom teachers.
Okay, so it wouldn't just be, or could it be by unit? So like in a certain area of math, a student?
It could be, and typically our reported standards tend to lay out like that.
Okay.
It would probably be by reported standard, and those are broken down anywhere between 8 to 15, I would say, on average.
Okay.
15, 17 is a bit of our higher side, but it would be looking at those. And it could be clustered together of these 7th grade, for a high school example, like a geometry. There might be a few that are clustered together that would fall into a typical chapter or unit, but I think the push would be to have students start to use the language of the reported standards and the I-CAN statements that are found on those proficiency tables as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
As we look at our 9-12 structure, this has been where the philosophy and the structure has seen the fewest changes. In part of that is due to the nature of high school and the sheer number of courses that are offered. Our high school MTSS staff is about the size of what our middle school staff is. There are 5 interventionists and a coordinator, and again, the key here is looking at student data. That data can be, again, academic or behavioral, and that is done if we look at our structures every Friday, and I'm assuming it's going to be Friday for the foreseeable future. Our student service team works with our assistant principal for student services, Ms. Faber, and they start to look at some of this data that shows at-risk students. And those teams are already personalizing what those plans and what those approaches are for individuals. There's monthly meetings for those check-ins, and then they tend to fall towards the end of the semester looking at that fall and spring data review to look for those trends, those needs, either for the next semester, and this is larger scale for these 2 twice yearly meetings, or over the summer to help intervene for the next year. But this structure is in place. There is an RTI or MTSS lab at our high school. There are processes in place for students to self-select to go to the RTI lab when they've identified a need. But again, our key interventionists here, our key support comes from our classroom teachers of identifying how students are progressing, of looking at their success data and finding where those gaps may be, and then developing that plan. Different from where K-8 has had a little bit more structure, has been those targeted computer-based interventions. High school, those tend, because of, again, the sheer number of courses that are offered in a given content area, those become far less and less of, we can have our students use this ALEX program or Read 180 program. There are some very specific interventions that can be used, but this team, again, is looking at gaps in achievement in the classroom level, co-creating those plans with those interventionists, and then setting that side. And the high school has done a good job of that. Typically doesn't fall to a long cycle. It is intervening on an individual level with our students. Our interventionist roles is kind of similar to what we've talked about with K-8. They're finding those meeting times. So there's those Friday meetings or those small group meetings in case the data does change from Friday. But there's also our Wednesday KLC meetings. And within that Wednesday structure are built drilled down into KLCs, but then larger departments where the interventionists have an opportunity to work if our coordinator is seeing trends in a department, They can meet at the department level during the month, or they can go into KLC teams and work with a smaller KLC. Our coordinator, again, is looking at those large-scale trends, maintaining that data, maintaining requests. At our high school, our coordinator sits at and has a voice in looking at eligibility reports, taking and funneling all the different data from different courses and using that to build tailored plans for our students. A lot of this information contained in the 912 piece is very similar to what we've seen as far as the progress monitoring, the data collection. The data collection at the high school tends to come from classroom assessments. There's not a lot of standardized assessments. Our iReady to what we've used at the middle school. iReady is not administered at the high school, so that is a piece that we don't have. So it does come from individual classroom summative assessments, formative assessments on what the students are doing in their courses. Behavior data, we do have our behavior facilitator. That is also a key part of this team. This year, has worked very closely alongside with Mr. West, our dean, to look at some large-scale interventions for students. But that behavior piece, that academic and that behavior piece are tied towards those MTSS meetings, and we do have our 2 instructional coaches as well that help to when some of those professional development opportunities, opportunities to restructure classes or instructional practices a little bit differently, that's where you would start to see the instructional coaches play a role, not necessarily with the intervention of specific students, but looking at larger scale opportunities to change practice or intervene with some of those practices. Any questions for our high school?
What do you consider at risk?
For academics, I would say, I think we would need to take into account grade level. We do look at our freshmen that are on target and the number of semesters that they have failed, but I would start to look at attendance. You start to see more and more unexcused absences at the high school level. So students that are starting to show the chronic truancy, looking at that 5 to 7% of unexcused absences. We're starting to do more and more collection of assignment completion. But when you start to see more than 2 failing courses, those things can start to snowball pretty quickly.
You mentioned you guys are going to be able to be more reactive to this compared to the old system. Is this a help when it comes to the kids that are struggling, like with standard-based grading? Dr. Mum also made the comment too that it could be something short-lived or it could be something long-term, and some of that. And I know that's why I was asking also about data too. If the kids have a voice, was wondering what's the process for them too. If it is a standard-based grading academic challenge that they're having, is what would they go? How would they proceed? Asking a teacher for help or get through this process, or how would a teacher, what's their process for this?
For sure. Their first point of contact would be their classroom teacher. From a standards-based grading lens, what I would want to know is it a question about clarity with where they stand in a given reported standard? That for sure could be cleared up on the spot with the teacher. If it is standards-based grading in terms of the standard itself, our high school was part of those school improvement plans, and they have the vast majority of the students in our district. So again, those practices and identifying standards, identifying the ICANN targets, that is seen throughout all of our buildings. So that would be no different than the elementary or middle schools as far as the expectations of I'm feeling behind in this, or my last grades, they'll know the language of a proficient. And they will know the expectations of what approaching proficient looks like. So it is always our goal to have students use that language, and some of the feedback and surveying we've done of our students has shown a tremendous growth in them using that language. But I think if it comes to truly the reporting side, that would be an on-the-spot question with our teachers of where am I in the process of this reported standard? If it is through the lens of learning that concept, I think that becomes a bit of a deeper picture between the teacher, certainly, but then That's where the interventionist and the teacher would work together to identify additional instruction, different instruction of maybe looking at something differently. If there's a different environment that could be provided to that student, that is where the intervention and the learning side of that would probably come from.
The reason I was asking too is because there's been some conversation of quicker response to some of the kids, like we heard a couple meetings ago about students that are in sports that have not been eligible. So would this help, is there a quicker response for that? Or even, I was asking about at-risk too, because not just necessarily the kids that are flunking, but kids that are possibly that were A's and now are getting C's. So that's a concern for them, obviously, or A's to B's. That's a stressor for some of the kids that, that strive for those grades. So is this a response for all of those kind of kids?
Yep, and I think what this would do would help to clarify exactly what is happening. There is a portion, and I think this speaks to a larger picture of education with a traditional grading, and we've shared this in the past. In a traditional grading system, there is opportunities for students to add additional points to their overall percentage to essentially inflate a grade based on compliant behaviors, based on practice behaviors, and some of those grades can reflect an A or a B, where standards-based grading really targets student learning. And some students that are used to getting A's and B's, a B, B minus, C might reflect more true learning when it is very targeted towards a learning acquisition, not necessary compliance towards projects and assignments in class. How this will benefit that is that now there's a team that can address the learning side of that. So here is, and it is a little bit, I may have turned this off, it is a little bit more responsive, more timely of a response to students that can then see, here is my learning gap. I then have not only my classroom teacher that has 150, 175 students, I then have an interventionist, I have study hall or lunch where I can do a walk-in lab with our RTI team. So that then becomes a quicker turnaround for students understanding not only where they're at, but why their achievement is at that level, and then can intervene further.
Thank
To
you.
kind of piggyback on that, or
I'm done. Yeah.
it sounds to me as if the additional teacher burden, with new information and things, seems like there is, though, some overlap with the monitoring that has to go on with proficiency-based progress, that it's already happening in standards-based grading, so that the teachers aren't going to have to come and take this, do things, a whole new set of things. They are already doing a lot of them through, looking at the proficiency tables for the standards-based grading. And so it's, I'm just gauging, load on teachers and things. And it sounds to me, and I guess I'm asking if I'm right or if I'm misunderstanding.
Yes, there are a lot of overlaps. I think, and this goes to a much larger conversation that we are continually having at our building levels with standards-based grading. It streamlines the communication a little bit. With standards-based grading, there tends to be more work up front. And some of that work may come over the summertime. Some of that work may come at establishing routines and behaviors in the beginning of the year when you set the expectation that we are going to speak to the language in a proficiency table. Those, for the identified courses, particularly at the high school, those pieces should start to overlap. Students should be used to hearing those things. They're seeing their I can statements. The next level to that then is that those reported standards and those I can statements are used to write targeted assessments. And so our assessments are matching our standards. So there is a lot of overlap in the work that is happening right now.
And the recognition, the instructor recognition of a lack of proficiency should already be going on.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. The last piece on here is just a timeline. Again, this is a very expansive undertaking. It has been going on for a few years now. We've pushed through as much as we could last year, but I want to give a huge shout out to the team that has taken time out in a very difficult time to step out of your classroom because they know the importance of intervening with students. And some of that time up front, again, some of that front-loaded hard work now is going to pay dividends over the next couple of years. So we're, again, right at that April level where we are starting to talk about some of those professional development opportunities. We have shared our staffing plan with all of our buildings prior to spring break. So now it is looking and digging into specific building needs as we move forward. It is at grade spans of sharing what those shifts may look like, sharing what the structure may continue to look like with our parents, and then next year, knowing that the benefit of having all of those teams was critically important to our success thus far in establishing our non-negotiables, of continuing to have that committee meet periodically next year. Dr. Mumm and myself have started to outline meeting times where grade span coordinators can get together, in particular some of those transitional grades from 5th to 6th and then from 8th to 9th, to start to look at what intervention looks like, what MTSS looks like. So those are all some of the next steps that we will be planning throughout the summer and then throughout the course of next year. Thank you.
Additional questions? Anybody? Okay, thank you very much. So we will move on now to J2, which is the update on impact of EC5 behavior facilitator positions.
Yes, yes, thank you. This topic, as we've added our behavior facilitators this year, one of the things we wanted to do is bring back an update on a lot of the work that was done during the course of the year, and then a lot of the planning moving forward. So with that, as much as we love Dr. Mumm and Mr. Raleigh here, we're going to get to hear from our actual facilitators and share a little bit about what they're doing. And then tonight it's the EC5, and then we split that up, and then at a future meeting we'll bring the 6 through 12 behavior facilitators in and segment that a little bit because there were heavy presentation tonight, so we broke it up a little bit. Dr. Mumm.
So tonight you will see Jimmy Boyle and Nicole Full, our K2, 2 out of the 4 dynamic foursome, I guess it is, of our behavior facilitators. Real quick, I just wanted to say that this is a position that our staff and students definitely needed. You will see lots of data tonight, a lot of things that they've already honed in on. It is rare for me to visit a building and not hear a Jimmy and Nicole story, because they are with the students, they are with the staff, and so truly it is a celebration of just a small bit of their work that we captured in all of these slides. So Jimmy will introduce himself and Nicole.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jimmy Boyle, and I have Nicole Full with me. I am one of the EC through 5 behavior facilitators, and I am currently at John Shields in John Stewart Elementary, and Nicole is at Blackberry and McDowell. So Nicole and I have spent a majority of our time in the district working in the special education world. So we're really excited to discuss our new role tonight and kind of just discuss what the year has looked like, what our goals have been for year one and moving forward, and kind of just give you a snapshot of what everything looks like. Okay, so just a brief overview of the history. We've had a lot of reasons on the why behind the position, and that's all been delivered to you guys already when the positions were approved. We're grateful for the opportunity to continue to do the work in the classrooms and with classroom teachers and with students. So having the opportunity has been amazing. Really, when reflecting on the why behind what we're doing, it's really able to prioritize and establish relationships with staff and students to be able to support their SEL needs in the classroom so that they're available for learning. It's been a huge goal of ours this year, and we're excited to continue that in the upcoming years as well. So although tonight is just EC through 5 information, we've met with administration and discussed what are our goals or what are our consistent structures that we're looking for EC 12. And throughout those conversations, we came up with some targeted specific structures that related to what we want the position to be in the future and how to support students in the process. So we looked at what our main goal was for the year, and it was really to focus on those tier 1 supports, developing those strong relationships with students, being able to meet them where they're at, and be able to preemptively support them with strong core tier 1 instruction, with the hopes that it supported them throughout their time at Kaneland. So a little bit of an update as we're discussing. Excuse me. We talked about the why and kind of why it came to fruition and why it's here. This year, we've done we came into the year with a plan that we thought we were going to run with, and it kind of quickly changed. And I think that's been the role of the position, is being able to be adaptive to student needs and staff needs. So throughout what we're currently doing, our current structures are working with teachers to support them through the CASEL competencies, which is the Collaborative of Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And we use the Satchel data piece, which was the tool or the behavior screener we had for EC through 12 this year, to identify what are some sub-skills or what are some specific subsets that we can address with students. Where are there areas that we have room for growth? So it assesses relationship skills, self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and responsible decision-making. And so we collected all that data. We looked at where are some of the areas that we have room for growth in individual classrooms, as well as district trends. And then once we compiled all that information, we looked how can we address some of these larger scale behaviors that we've been seeing, like attention seeking in the classroom, work avoidance, sensory seeking, or that automatic behavior, or some of that tangible seeking, that item seeking behavior. So we look to see what interventions can be put in place on a tier 1 level to support the classroom, and then to support as many students as possible as well. Behavior facilitator support currently looks, it depends on the building and it depends on the grade level, but it could look for anything from one-to-one teacher support to whole group push-in lessons based on a specific CASEL competency. It could look like working with a small group outside of the classroom to identify a specific target, with always the goal of pushing back in to make sure that it's generalized, and we're working to make sure that the skills are generalized inside of the classroom. And it could look anything like we said, whole group instruction, all the way to celebrations of behavior supports that have been put in place. Just kind of continuing on some of the current practices that we've been doing. Through the CASEL survey and through the Satchel data, we were able to target push-in lessons directly to each specific classroom's competency. So for an example, one kindergarten classroom in one building may have needed support with relationship skills, while the neighboring classroom in kindergarten may have needed support with responsible decision making. So we looked at that information and we said, how can we go in and target a tier 1 lesson for the whole group to be able to support them? And then pull back out and say, great, that's awesome. Now we're seeing a trend across the district that maybe, and this is an example from here, but maybe it's responsible decision making in this specific grade level. Let's see how we can put our heads together between all 4 buildings and see how we can support that in a uniform decision as well. Throughout this, we've created, one of the big things that we've said, there's always been like the PD portion of it, or how we can model and how we can provide support into the classroom. So when we're not there, because we are split between buildings, we kind of curated extension activities for staff to be able to utilize, right? So we have these push-in lessons that we do once a week on these CASEL competencies, and then we have available specific extension activities that are available for classroom teachers to deliver throughout the week, and then we can come back, check, discuss how things are going, and then reassess later in the week or later in the month as well. So that library of resources is updated. It's consistently shared with staff. It's in a lot of our email signatures, so they always have access to it, so it's something that they can quickly pull up and have access to. The main goal is to continue to integrate tier 1, 2, and 3 supports into our core instruction, so that we can provide as many so we can provide a strong core instruction for our students. Kind of continuing this too, one of the areas that we were able to look at this year, because our goal was to kind of impact tier 1 support. So one of the areas we looked at was we looked at our SWIS, which is our school-wide information system, and it's where some of those referrals come in for students. And that could be for whether it's non-compliance or whether it's property destruction. That it kind of gets tagged in there and discussed. So we looked at that to see where are some areas that we could look to provide intervention or provide support. And the 2 biggest indicators for SWIS were recess and classroom, was where the most referrals were being written for students. So we kind of drilled down and said, okay, well, what can we do at recess and what can we do in the classroom to support that? We had the CASEL survey data to go in and provide those explicit SEL lessons. Now what can we do at recess? Since that was the second largest area of SWIS concern. So we took a look at a recess framework and said, and through observations at all 4 buildings, determined some of the successes and some of the challenges that we had, and then are working to create PD for the summer for recess monitors to be able to empower students to make responsible decision-making, to be able to identify self-management strategies, social awareness, all of those CASEL competencies that we're working on inside the classroom as well. And so that was a super quick overview of everything, but Nicole is going to kind of take over on how we kind of got there and what that foundation looked like for us.
Okay, Trimester One, we were able to get into all 4 elementary buildings and deliver 142 Tier 1 SEL lessons. In addition to that, we fulfilled 101 staff-initiated requests for support. So the biggest benefit of this was that we were able to make sure we were meeting our year 1 goal of building relationships with staff and students. Some additional benefits included being able to expand teacher SEL toolboxes through modeling content they may not be familiar with, in addition to just general classroom management strategies. Some other benefits too is that we got to see how students were interacting with students and how teachers were interacting with students. We noticed classroom community. What did it look like when kids needed to be redirected? How did they respond? Was there an opportunity for additional follow-up in that way? So that information made for a very busy first trimester. Then we decided we need to shift what our support looked like. We were giving an overall blanket of Tier 1 instruction in order to hit the ground running in the beginning of the school year. We wanted trimester 2 and 3 to be more individualized and target what each grade level needed in individual classrooms. Jimmy and I then decided that we were going to develop a brief teacher survey to check in and say, moving into the second part of the school year, what do you think, classroom teacher, is the biggest behavioral need? And how effective do you think we were with our trimester 1 practices? Then we also recognized the value of teacher or student voice and wanting to know how kids were feeling about their activities in school. How were they getting along with each other? How were they feeling about their teachers? And so by having that time and being able to individualize the support, that also made us more available for increased collaboration with teachers, additional assessment opportunities, and increased packages that we were able to make that were function-based and dug into the why were kids behaving the way they were. How could we get their needs met using appropriate behaviors that met their needs rather than them having to engage in those problematic behaviors as well. Let's see.
So this is the prioritized CASEL cohort competencies that we went through. Through the Satchel screener, it identified certain areas of those 5 competencies that each individual grade level needed to focus on. So up there, you'll see on the slide, in your presentation, you'll see from K through 5th throughout each of the buildings what the specific areas were that we went in and targeted those SEL lessons on. This is what the research that drove our Tier 1 instruction during that first during that first trimester in the school year. And Nicole referenced the teacher survey that we put out to see, teacher, does this look good? Are these CASEL competencies that we delivered instruction on, are they still something that we need some additional practice with? Are you still seeing this struggle in the classroom or at recess, or do you feel that this need was met, and what other areas are you seeing concerns in, or if not any, let's celebrate that together as well. So we broke down by grade level in building, and so overall percentage of K5 competencies demonstrating mastery based on teacher report was about 58% from the Tier 1 instruction that we delivered throughout that first trimester. And then this kind of information gave us, great, we weren't seeing this on that initial screener because it was just a screener. We weren't seeing this the first couple of weeks of school, but now we are seeing that responsible decision making is really hard for some of these students to work in on this particular classroom. Let's focus on that. Let's shift and let's see how we can impact that.
The following slides are individual questions from the CASEL survey that we gave to students. You'll see the school breakdown on the following slide for each one of these. This first one, my teacher likes and cares about me, is a strong indicator of relationship skills. About 88% of kindergarten through 5th grade across the district mark themselves as a 4 or a 5. They are feeling well connected to their teachers and staff, and we know that research indicates the more connected students feel to teachers, the more likely they are to engage in challenging content and persist through difficult tasks. The second one, I know how to be a good partner and friend. We have about 81% of K through 5 students marking themselves as a 4 or 5. Students are feeling confident in their relationships with one another, as well as being a strong indicator of the competency of social awareness. This is even bigger celebration when you consider that the past 2 years before this school year, they had limited interactions with peers. And so to be feeling this confident and comfortable going from this year is definitely a celebration. This one, you'll notice that we have a smaller number of students rating themselves a 4 or 5. We have about 56% of students. When we think about this question, it really tags along to the idea of responsible decision making. And when we drill down into responsible decision making, we think about all the components of executive functioning skills. When we're looking at EC through 5 students, executive functioning is definitely a skill we start teaching in kindergarten, but it continues to evolve throughout the school years. And actually, executive functioning isn't fully developed until adolescent into young adult skills. So we would expect this to be a lower rated skill, showing that students are pretty accurate in what they're thinking about how they're doing with these type of complex situations. Something we will still consider to address and implement, but we are right on track with this one. The last one is something that's a little more global. We can actually think about all the competencies with this one, and we have about 70% of our students, kindergarten through 5th grade, rating themselves as 4 through 5. So it takes some time to think about how can we reflect on inclusivity. What about social awareness, self-awareness, relationship skills, even the self-management part about how do kids handle disagreements with each other when you have different thinking. So I think that when we look at our data, we're in a pretty good place considering only 4% of kindergarten through 5th grade students rated themselves as a 1 or 2. So we're moving in the right direction, but definitely need to have some continued intentional conversations and practice opportunities for kids getting to work with people who are different from them.
So I have a quick question. On these questions, are you able to identify the students? Because, you know, you're showing it to us as an overview, but in some of these questions, I think it could be a cry for help. You know, I don't know how to be a good friend. I don't know how to find friend, you know, that kind of thing. You could probably head off some of that.
This was a very powerful survey in the fact that it was a single sentence and it was eye-opening at the building level for classrooms, for grade levels, for individual students. And so what we did is we looked over this information, we shared it with teams, and we used it to analyze some of our data, but we also were noting students who did rate themselves lower so we could bring it to our student support services team and identify, is this a child that's already having an intervention, and does the intervention incorporate where the student's feeling like they're not doing as well as we may like them to, or do we need to add another layer as well?
Okay, thank you.
So I touched on earlier that we discussed the Swiss referrals. The second largest area was recess. So we utilized the Playworks Great Recess Framework, which was an observational tool, and we were able to take some data at all 4 of the buildings to determine some of the strengths and weaknesses that we saw throughout recess. It covered everything from safety to engagement to student empowerment. So it was another one of those surveys and observational tools that really brought a lot of insight to see how we can continue to develop and support that. So as behavior facilitators, we look at what are some tier 1 supports that we can provide to the building or to staff or to students to be able to make them the most successful students they can be moving forward. And recess was another area that we took that to make a deeper dive into it. And from that, you'll see up here, we have the 4 buildings again, and we identified the safety subsection. This was an area that each of them, it was a relative strength across all 4 elementary buildings, which we were excited to note. And then we looked at how we can take the information from here to provide professional development moving forward, for our recess monitors, and how we can and provide empowerment to engage with students to help them with all of their CASEL competencies that we've been working on in the classroom. So here's a preview of what you guys will see at the next board meeting with the 6 through 12 behavior facilitators. Just updates on overall trends and everything. So if there's do you have any questions for us at the EC through 5 level?
I just had a quick question. In the MTSS presentation, you guys were a part of that team. What does that look like for you now? Is that a shift for you guys? Is that something you're going to add on, or is this something you're already working with the RTI teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, some of our buildings are piloting some structures of what MTSS could potentially look like down the line now that some of the patterns have come out. So we are members in that team now supporting RTI in that process as well. So that will be kind of a seamless transition, I think, when we look to kind of support MTSS next year.
Okay.
Anything else? We good? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is the presentation of student handbook on first reading.
Yes, we received an overview of the shift of what the student handbook is going to look like, coming from 3 different handbooks to merging it to one consistent handbook, EC12, with a couple different sections of it. And so with that, I'll turn it over. Obviously, you're starting, Brian.
Yep.
Brian Surface.
Thank you, Dr. Layden. We are really excited tonight to move forward here with the opportunity to present the progress of the updated student handbook. As I shared at our January update when I first presented about this, our committee's goal has been to create a single Kaneland student handbook containing all EC12 consistent policies with addendums of grade span specific practices. In essence, our goal has been to take a look at all 3 of our grade span handbooks and combine them into one user-friendly and easy to navigate as best as possible resource and document for our entire school district. So a Kaneland-focused student handbook. And we're really excited about the work that we've put in over the last 10 months and how this resource can continue to be utilized and really enhance what a student handbook can be for our students and our staff. So tonight's purpose really is to not only share that first draft, but highlight some of the key changes and updates associated with that new Kaneland student handbook. And before we do get to some of those changes and updates, I'd like to take a moment to kind of refresh some of those pieces that I shared in January, specifically about the process that our committee has worked on and gone through during this. So with the development, it's been a comparison and discussion of the grade span handbooks. So we looked through everything. All 3 of the handbooks, we went section by section. We also took a deep dive into the IPA student handbook in identifying the appropriate and consistent language to eliminate or carry over. And we also took an opportunity to look at other area handbooks. So this was really something that was extremely purposeful and took a deep dive across the board. The format that we've been able to put together here really does kind of model that IPA student handbook, and there's a few reasons for that. The first is that the IPA student handbook is something developed by the state of Illinois that is looked over by legal counsel and is really that recommendation for school districts to look over and utilize. But also it's very organized, and each year there are updates provided from that model student handbook that as a district we look at as a team. So one of the things that we're excited about long term is when those updates come out every year, we're going to be able to take a look at those, see if they're applicable to Kaneland School District, and easily apply them into the appropriate sections so it stays organized and consistent, easy to use document, not only now but through the future.
Brian, can you share what the acronym IPA stands for in this instance?
Illinois
Principal Association.
Association.
Yeah,
Thank you. Sorry.
Yep, that's
I
okay.
didn't want to misspeak.
Yeah.
Golly.
I wanted to clarify.
Put me on the spot there. So the format, and I know it's a rather lengthy document. I think it comes in just under, it will come right around 100 pages. It's a format that we've spent a lot of time looking at, not only the contents, but also making sure that it's user-friendly. So it has a very consistent table of contents page. The chapters and addendum sections are clearly separated by page breaks. On electronic version, you'll notice that it is bookmarked, so you can click on those specific sections and move to those easily to provide digital users easy-to-use access. So again, it was part of not only looking at the content of what's been provided, but also making sure that when we do use it, it's as user-friendly as possible. So as we've gone through, that's been kind of the process that we've been following. We do have some notable changes and updates. We have 2 key updates that we'd like to share, and then we also have the grade span specific changes and updates, and we're going to highlight some of those notable items. In the packet tonight, there's a specific a specific document for each of the 3 grade spans that does highlight previous language and new language, so we've really been diligent in wanting to highlight and make sure we cover all of that information. So with that, I'll first turn it over to discipline.
Hello, my name is Natalie Smith, and I'm the dean here at Harder. And the first thing that we want to draw your attention to is discipline. So obviously, discipline can look different across early childhood through 12th grade, but the sections of prohibited conduct and the processes are the same. So we were able to work to create a consistency of language in this section specifically. Here we also use the IPA wording, which is important for discipline specifically because that wording was created with attorneys and is kept up to date with the most recent case law. We also included a clarification of the suspension and expulsion process. So that's always been in the middle school and the high school handbook, but since that is what's utilized in EC through 12, that entire process is now listed. And there's also the inclusion of the full district bullying response plan. So that's a plan that was created by Kaneland teachers and administrators a few years ago. And for example, elementary, in their handbook, they referenced it. And at Harder, we had pieces of it in our handbook. And the high school has always had the entire plan. So now that entire bullying response plan will be listed in the EC12 handbook.
I'm shorter than everybody. So, hi, I'm Josh West, Dean at Kaneland High School. We're fortunate that we kind of have some of this already in our handbook, but to align the elementary and the middle school with the high school, we decided to look at some other handbooks, and one that we really found and we all liked talked about goals outside of, passing your classes and learning content standards, but goals. So some of those goals we identified were to allow students to wear clothing of their choice that is comfortable. I think it's important, the days of wearing a suit and tie when you travel on an airplane just don't exist anymore. There's a side to be comfortable and just focus on learning. We also allow students to wear clothing that expresses their self-identified gender. That's a big thing right now. So again, that comfort, students succeed in the classroom. Along with those goals, we identified must-wears. So students must wear shirt, shoes, and a bottom. There isn't the 2-finger over the shoulder straps or your hands must. None of that exists. Just what must they wear? We also identify things that students may wear. This already exists at the high school. Students can wear hats and hoods. I believe the middle school tried it. It's been in place for roughly at the high school 3 years. What we have seen, or I have seen, is the luster has worn off with the hats and the hoods. It was a big thing. We loved it. Now it's like, I think I'll comb my hair today. So that aligns with all levels now that we can wear hats and hoods. We also identified things that students cannot wear, which remained roughly the same at the high school. Can't wear things of hate speech, profanity, images, or language of drugs and alcohol. Roughly a small percentage of kids might wear something at the high school, whether it's some sort of a shirt or a hat. And part of that enforcement, we like to keep the kids in the classroom as much as possible. So if a student has a we'll just say an alcohol logo on a hat. My conversation with that student is, I can't send you back to class, but I can't force you to remove that hat. So if you'd like to stay here, I've got a spot that you can remain in a study hall setting, and 95 to 97 times out of 100, the kid is like, takes it off, no problem. But we want to keep those kids in the classroom as much as possible. So removing them from class to have an altercation or an argument about, well, this makes me feel comfortable, but it's a Confederate flag. Just not conversations that we really want to have. We want the kids to be comfortable, but we know that there are things that they can and cannot wear, so we want to identify those goals. So that's where we're at with our dress code. Do you have any questions for me or the dress code?
I have a comment. People have been screaming for changes to the dress code for a long time. I think this is great. I think it hits all the right notes. It gets rid of all the things that didn't need to be there. It seems to be respectful of, students and their choice, and seems equitable. There were a lot of questions about dress codes, the dress code not being enforced equally among male and female identifying students. So I just think it's a great step forward, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Thank you again for your time.
Good evening. I'm Emily Waller. I'm the assistant principal at Blackberry Creek and John Stewart. I'm going to be speaking to the notable changes and updates for EC through 5. As all of my colleagues have mentioned, our main goal was to align all of the handbooks. So most of the changes and updates for levels EC through 5, we're just adding language. We kind of combined a little bit of what everyone already had, or we expanded upon what we had at the elementary level. So with disciplinary measures, we again really aligned with 6 through 12. There are a list of a wide range of options provided for what disciplinary measures could look like. They're all very restorative in nature, and our main goal is to keep kids in class and treat each individual student differently based on what the event was that occurred. As Mrs. Smith said, bullying, we included the full bullying prevention and intervention plan. Previously, we had mentioned that it was on the website, but now it is included in the handbook. The exemption from PE, we really aligned that with what the IPA model student handbook said. For that one, we do still have this policy, but students need to provide a note from a medical professional. There is also the allowance for an exemption from PE for a religious reason, and that note would need to be provided from a clergy member. With the dress code, as Mr. West just covered, we really want to keep students in class, and at the elementary level, any dress code violation would be considered very minor on the continuum of any disciplinary measures. We really want to focus on making sure that kids are safe and that nothing that they're wearing is displaying anything that's violent or discriminatory in nature. On the next slide, we have more of those updates. Like I said, these really were aligned to just add a depth of language. So for this, we have social media. Our student conduct section is covered in our student behavior section. So that change was really just aligning the language there. Our homework policy, we included the board policy on that. And then for search and seizure, I can tell you since I've been working in the buildings in August, it's not something that has happened. But in the event that it would be something we would follow the 6 through 12 policy on. Any questions for EC through 5 updates? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, just a few updates for the 6-8 portion of the handbook. We were able to add some language referencing our own use of PASS, which is a positive alternative to student suspension. That's something that's already in place at the high school and allows for more flexibility in having students outside of class to serve a consequence or work in a restorative justice manner, but for something that may not have actually required a in-school suspension or an out-of-school suspension. We did add a middle school appendix, which has a couple middle school specific things such as locker use, hall passes, out of bounds. There is a link to the entire Harder Athletic Extracurricular Handbook, and finally our course book is no longer listed in our handbook. So that is something separate, its own course book that can be reached through the website.
Just a couple changes at the high school. We took some language from the middle school that identified exactly what cyberbullying was. In our plan, it just kind of had a notation that cyberbullying was included in all forms of bullying. So we expanded upon that and gave a definition. And we're also looking to change our absence policy. Currently, first period, when a student shows up more than 10 minutes late, they are marked absent and they stay absent whether they come to class or not. For the remainder of the day, it is 5 minutes late. What we're finding, what I found, is there's really no incentive for a student to return to class. Well, I'm 15 minutes late, what's the incentive? So we want to strip that. This also aligns with better with our state reporting as far as student attendance. So not really sure how this was missed over the years, but we'd like to change that immediately. Also, 1,400 kids. I am the only dean. We talk to students based on every 5 absences and every 5 tardies. So previously, it was me talking to students on every single absence. At the elementary and the middle school level, the secretaries are able to communicate home to every single kid that is marked absent because there's just not a lot of opportunity for students to travel. At the high school, we have MTSS, we have the library, we have students that get permission to go to the cafeteria and don't return. There's a lot of travel. I cannot maintain every single student, every single absence to contact home. So we've done that. I think in our handbook currently we had that listed for absences. I wanted to add tardies in that as well. So any questions for me on the notable changes at the high school?
Then when would you refer to the MTSS team, like as far as the tardies and absences? Because that was one thing they specifically mentioned when they gave their presentation.
Fortunately, I work with Mrs. Faber, so in previous years, I went to all those meetings on Friday. I think with just the climate of COVID and kind of some of the upticks in some areas, I haven't gone to those meetings, but we have regular dialogue conversations. Anytime a student comes up for a discipline matter, I work with Mrs. Rothaker, Coach Ryan, any one of the MTSS facilitators to just ask questions on what are you seeing with the student. I love to stress the fact that at our high school, it's not, at least the way I operate, I'm not looking for consequences. It's how can we restore, how can I put this kid in a position to be successful in the classroom. So they're really the experts in that field. They get to know those students really, really well. And so anytime students come up, really several times, I like to bounce ideas off them. It's also important to know that our truancy officer and ROE, they're swamped. And when we get to that 16, 17, specifically 18, they're really not as helpful as maybe they'd be at the elementary or middle school level. So I really have to use the MTSS, so if there's a student that comes up, or I'm just kind of looking with some of our reports that come down from the secretaries, like our 10-day absence or a 15 absent, I'll bounce ideas off them immediately just to get their take, and if they know something that maybe I need to know.
Sounds good, thank you.
Right, thank you.
The next section is specifically to our Fox Valley Career Center. Ms. Vita Martin is unable to be here tonight, but she was the representative specifically to the Fox Valley Career Center. There are several, as you know, there are several stakeholders involved from different districts as part of that partnership through the Fox Valley Career Center. However, it has provided an opportunity to really take a look at the Fox Valley Career Center handbook. We discussed full integration of this into this new Kaelyn-specific handbook, but felt that due to the multitude of stakeholders a part of it, that keeping it as a separate standalone handbook was important. However, as part of this process, in looking at the IPA handbook and looking at some of that consistent language, that handbook was also updated. So you'll note here that it's been revised to include a lot of that IPA language and the progressive discipline, and includes the most current district updates and work-based learning language to align with the Fox Valley Career Center and our business partners in industry. And then as we continue to move forward, will be a part of those yearly revisions where we sit down as a team, look over the recommendations by the IPA handbook, model student handbook, and make revisions as necessary. So really wanted to make sure that we highlighted that as well. It is included in the addendum section at the end of the handbook, so it is still a part of it. It's just going to take you, once you click on that, to that specific handbook. Questions specifically to the Fox Valley Career Center? So I know that covers a wide range of different things. At this time, are there any further questions related to the new handbook?
I don't think so. I think it's great to have one cohesive document. I think it's been needed for a long time, so appreciate everyone's hard work on this.
Thank you. We've worked really hard and are looking forward to wrapping this up.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
So on this one, we do have a vote request. So at this time, I will entertain a motion that the Kaneland Board of Education approve on first reading the student handbook that is aligned between early childhood through 12th grade to be implemented for the 2022-2023 school year.
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Dr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. Mankivsky.
Aye.
Mrs. Simmons.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mrs. Junk.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Okay, moving right along. We are now on the Personalized Learning Academy presentation.
Yes, thank you. As we have continued personalized learning from Kaelyn 2020 through Kaelyn Connects, the Personalized Learning Academy is a topic that we've broached all along with a goal to reach for the 23-24 school year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura Garland, and she can provide the latest news and updates.
All right, good evening. I am Laura Garland, Personalized Learning Coordinator for the district, and I'm here to give you an update on the creation of the Ignite Personalized Learning Academy. So for this presentation, our intention is to share with you a conceptual understanding of what the Academy is, what its intention is, what benefits it will serve for our students. As we continue to do our planning and as we begin to get additional information about the specific students that will attend the Academy, we will be back to share specific information about staffing plans, which we'll need to know our student enrollment to really finalize those, budget, transportation. A lot of those things are student dependent, so once we have that information, we'll be back with additional presentations. But for now, we really want you to continue to develop your understanding of what the Academy is and how it can really support our students. So what is the Kaneland Ignite Personalized Learning Academy? It is a Kaneland school that is focused on taking personalized practices to the deepest level. Across Kaneland, it has been our commitment through our previous strategic plan and now throughout Kaneland Connects to infuse opportunities for students to have a voice and choice in their own learning, to drive their own learning, to proceed through learning at individual pacing, truly to allow students to take a more active role in their learning. The Ignite Academy is designed to provide students with the opportunity to remove some of the traditional constraints or structures that are embedded within traditional schools so that we can deepen their ability to have a voice within their own learning. The vision of this academy is to provide those opportunities, and we'll do that through a variety of formats. One specifically is through utilizing interdisciplinary opportunities. We'll show you in just a few minutes a student schedule that will give you some insight into what that structure will look like. Students will truly be involved in co-constructing their own learning within the rigorous curriculum standards that all Kaneland students are subjected, or not subjected to, but have the opportunity to learn. That's a frequent question with the Academy is, will students be learning the same standards as students in comprehensive Kaneland schools? And the answer is yes. Those rigorous standards, what they learn is very similar. How they learn that, the methods through which they engage in their instruction, the opportunity to infuse their own interests, their own strengths, their own opportunities for growth,
All of that is where students will have the opportunity to infuse their voice and their choice within their learning, as well as in how they demonstrate their learning. So Academy students will still need to master the same standards, but the way in which they do that is where the unique experience at the Academy will be. The Academy will allow us to remove some of the traditional constraints such as bell schedules. So in a traditional setting, you have a designated number of minutes for a class period or for a semester or for a trimester. And really learning needs to take place within those established time periods. By removing those bell schedules, it really opens up some flexibility at the Academy for students to extend that learning throughout a school day, a week, across a semester, across some of those traditional benchmarks that we have in traditional schools. Similar, you'll see a note with no specific ties to grade designations. Formally, students will still have ties to grade designations in state and district-wide reporting systems. You'll still be a 6th grader, a 7th grader, an 8th grader. Within the actual day-to-day instruction in an Academy setting, students will have the opportunity to flexibly and fluidly move across multi-age continuums of learning. And so it won't just be you're a 6th grade student and you're constrained to those 6th grade standards and those 6th grade skills. You'll be able to move across multiple grade continuums based on your own readiness, based on your own demonstrations of proficiency, and sometimes just based on your interest and your motivation to experience a particular content standard, maybe in a stage of your learning that you wouldn't have necessarily experienced in a traditional setting. So some of the foundational pillars that the Academy is built upon is the concept of a generative curriculum. And what that essentially means is that the student has a say in building what their experience and their learning consists of. And they do that alongside teachers. It's not just turning that responsibility over 100% to students, but it's teachers and students working together to really understand the goals of the student, the interests of the student, the passions of the student, what skills the student needs to have the most time working through. And so together they build that curriculum as they progress. And so a teacher might work with a student to talk about what are some different content standards that really we could bring together, and you can work through a process in which you might demonstrate proficiency across different content standards, and we'll build that experience together, either as a teacher-student pair, perhaps as a small group, or perhaps as a larger group. The blended age, again, students can work across continuums of learning and not maintain just their own grade level curricular standards. There'll be a deep focus on developing learner dispositions. We know that students have not traditionally had experience in classrooms where they've been given the opportunity to drive their own learning. And as we've worked across Kaelyn to infuse practices where students can have that voice and choice, often what we see is they're not quite sure what that looks like. And we need to support them in being able to develop what to do when something is really hard. As I've worked with students in this role as personalized learning coordinator, it's interesting to see their realization that, oh, you want me to do the hard work. You want me to do the hard thinking. That's different than what really they've been expected to do in the past, and we have to support them with that and scaffold that understanding. And so oftentimes we encourage, I worked with a 3rd grader this week who came up and said, this is too much. I need somebody just to help me make a choice. That's personalized learning. You've self-reflected on how you're feeling in this experience. You've identified what type of instruction you need. That student specifically sought some direct teacher instruction. That's personalized learning, not just allowing every child to pick for whatever reason, but to truly have a learning-focused reason for making the choices. So that was a great experience with a student demonstrating her own ability to reflect on her learning and then advocate for what she needed. Collaborative teaching and learning, again, this is present in all Kaneland schools, but at the Academy, through the interdisciplinary framework that we've established for the schedule, teachers will be co-teaching together across disciplines. And so, again, you'll see in the schedule where we have a humanities block where social studies and ELA standards are blended together. We have a STEM block where math and science standards are blended together, and those are taught by 2 teachers, each certified in one of those content areas, so that those content standards can be seamlessly integrated based on input from the students as well. And then that ownership of learning. We truly want students to take take to heart the understanding that they own their own learning and that they're not only responsible for their struggles, but their successes as well, and that they can indeed infuse their own goals, their own reflections, their own needs within their learning. So a little bit of a compare and a contrast. Again, how does personalization at Ignite Academy differ from personalization in all Kaneland schools? And a key distinction there is that personalized learning is being infused across all Kaneland schools. That's been a goal of our district for several years. Again, a traditional school simply has barriers in place that prohibit the deepest levels of personalization to occur, as well as that's not necessarily what every student needs. So providing full, in-depth, pure personalized practices is not necessarily going to meet the needs of all learners, but we do know that we have students who do need that opportunity. So when we think about the differences, structures such as time, place, and pace, they generally are more fixed in a traditional school simply because of bell schedules and semester markings. In an academy, we're removing those structures so that learning it's going to take the time that it takes, and students can maybe set that aside, come back to that. They'll really work with their advisor at the academy to decide what do I need and how long is that taking me, and maybe I need a break and I'll come back to that. Inclusivity of student voice and choice, again, is present across Kaneland. At the academy, it's going to be used to literally build their experience, where in a traditional Kaneland school, we look for ways in which we can embed that, and that's a goal. We continue to increase students' ability to have voice and choice, but again, it's often within a component of an activity rather than the entire activity and experience itself. Proficiency-driven progress, again, is present in all Kaneland schools. Within a traditional setting, that's going to be bound by the time constraints that just a traditional setting has, where at the academy we can remove some of those structures. In terms of developing the actual learned knowledge or developing a learning path, in a traditional school that's generally developed by the teacher with the needs of the student in mind. It's very much focused on what that student's exhibiting, but ultimately it's the teacher that's developing those experiences. At the academy, it's the teacher and student co-developing and co-creating those experiences. And then in terms of demonstrating progress and assessment, again, that's co-constructed between a student and a teacher in an academy setting. In a traditional setting, we absolutely are working to infuse additional choice and voice with students and how they demonstrate their learning, but there do tend to be more standardized types of demonstrations of proficiency. So it might be more of a formal test, or we're all going to do a project of some sort, rather than the student identifying this is how I plan to demonstrate proficiency. This is the schedule that I had referenced. So a couple key things to note here is that Students' Day would be composed of a humanities block and a STEM block. They would have all of the same content standards that any Kaneland student has, and they would be infused within those blocks. The order in which they choose to pursue proficiency on standards, the methods through which they choose to pursue proficiency, those will all be personalized to the child, but those standards are still relevant and important in their learning. A couple additional things, the advisory period. We do plan to have an entire academy advisory period where all students will work in blended age groups on leadership types of skills, team building types of activities, social emotional learning types of lessons, and really utilize not just an adult mentor system, but also a peer mentor system. So within advisory, we would have students from grades 4 through 8 together building those familial relationships to support some of the learner disposition acquisition activities that we talked about. And then the Lunch Connect serves somewhat as our MTSS system. That would be the time where students have access to their teachers and teachers have access to their students to be able to identify areas in which they might need some additional support. Maybe they want some one-on-one assistance. They want to reflect with somebody. There'll be built-in time daily for them to be able to do that. So while it's very much founded on the student driving that experience, we also want to provide ample opportunity for them to co-construct those experiences with adults, and we've embedded that throughout the day. Pathways is similar to an exploratory. Currently, with an exploratory at the elementary level, you're either in that exploratory for the whole year, or you may participate in the wheel at the middle school. At the academy, we've developed a pathways component where we want to expose students to as many different types of experiences as possible, as well as give them a voice in helping to create some of those experiences. So pathways consist of 6 different pathways, at least in theory at the moment. We have a few schools we've visited that we're using their foundation to build upon, but students would choose every 6 weeks from a different strand on an exploratory experience. And so some of those that we've seen in other schools are traditional in the sense that it might be a musical strand or an artistic strand, but also business strand, marketing strands. Most of the schools that we visited have talked about the importance of starting with some initial courses to let students choose from. They do require students to choose from a minimum of 3 different types of pathways throughout the school year so that we're still increasing exposure, but also allowing them to stick with and make the choice of this is the particular type of additional experience I'm looking to explore. As the schools become more established, the students get to propose different pathways. They bring in outside community members to help support some of those experiences and really just look to expose as much as possible. We have been very fortunate to partner with Interiors for Business out of Batavia, who helped us become part of a pilot classroom project through Steelcase, a furniture outfitting company. When we think about the type of learning we are looking to create, the learning experiences at the academy, we want to make sure that those learning spaces are conducive to the type of learning. And so there will certainly be some whole group instruction. There will certainly be small group. There'll be one-on-one. There'll be a lot of fluidity and flexibility throughout the school day and students needing to work and learn in different environments. And so we are looking to create learning environments that are as flexible as possible. Let students move to different groupings, give them time to find a quiet spot off to the side, to bring small groups together. And so we've been fortunate to have 1 classroom outfitted through the pilot program, as well as 2 common learning spaces. These are a few of the common learning spaces that just allow for small groups to move to a different environment, to have some conversation, some time for students, or space for students to work independently, really looking to create as many different environments to support as many different types of learning. So this pilot program has allowed us to at least establish some initial learning spaces, and then good or bad, it's kind of good that we're limited to what the pilot will support, because what we really want to do is be able to have students continue to grow and develop and tell us, is this working for me? What else do I need? This area is for this purpose. It doesn't really fit that. Once we get kids living and breathing in these spaces, that's when we want to be able to expand. So specifically, some of those logistics, the academy is opening in the fall of 2023, so that's not this next school year. We have another full year of planning. It is open in the first year to students, any student, in grade 4 through 8, and we want to emphasize any Kaneland student. There's no specific student entrance criteria. Kaneland Academy students are still Kaneland students. They have accessibility to the same supports and services and resources that any Kaneland student has. We are looking in the first year to cap enrollment at 200 students, so that would be 50 from 4th and 5th grades and 150 from 6th through 8 within that first year, and then we plan to expand each year by 1 grade level. So the following year we would expand to 9th grade so that current 8th graders in the academy would be able to stay if that environment's working for them. Attendance hours, I have approximately up there right now. Again, it's going to be somewhat dependent in terms of collaborating with transportation, but also dependent on where we're bringing students from. So we don't know specifically what towns and how far we'll be transporting and how many from each municipality. And once we have that information, we can firm up those times, but that's generally speaking what we're looking at. And again, because knowing the specific students, what their needs are, where they're coming from, a lot of that, we need to have that information to drive a very personalized approach for those students. We need to know who they are. So we're looking to open early application this coming October. It would be for the following school year, but it would give us enough time to be able to plan and solidify some of those logistical details once we know those students. Transportation will be provided for Academy students, just like any other Kaneland student. And then I mentioned the exploratory pathways. I mentioned this just a little bit. Really, we want to emphasize that Kaneland Ignite Academy students are still Kaneland Knights. It's just a different type of learning for a different purpose and different learning style of the student. I went through most of that. I didn't mention Kaneland sports clubs and activities. Academy students will have access to participating in all of the same clubs, activities, and sports as all Kaneland students, and ideally we're hoping to create some Academy-specific opportunities for kids as well once we get those students and know what they're interested in. And then for families that are starting to kind of throw around the idea of, is my student a good fit for this type of learning environment? What are some things that I might want to consider? And so we've got, it might be the right fit if you are excited about a generative curriculum. If your student is the type of student who enjoys taking an active role in their learning, who likes to have a say in how, what, and when they learn and where they learn. If the idea of working across multiple grade level continuums of learning, if you're comfortable with flexible delivery models, and students are exhibiting a desire to self-advocate, if they have the confidence to do that, if they're growth-oriented, if they're curious and really wanting to take a more active role in their learning, that this might be a real great fit for your student. If you're simply looking for an alternative school but haven't really considered those factors, it might be something we can talk through and make sure it's going to be the right fit. In terms of supporting and just the development of the Academy, we're excited about some opportunities. I mentioned the pilot classrooms. We've also applied for the Kaelyn Foundation grant. We've had an initial meeting with Rich Harvest Farms, who's expressed some interest in partnering to provide some experiences for students, as well as the Dunham Foundation. We just today actually solidified a date for a meeting to pursue some additional potential grant opportunities through the Dunham Foundation. And then continuing to seek additional resources, as well as continuing to speak about the Academy concept on a larger platform to spotlight and highlight the work that Kaneland's doing a bit in this area, because it is pretty unique experience that we would be able to offer for our students. So final slide here is just a timeline. It doesn't list everything on here, but certainly wanted to make sure you were aware that we would continue to provide board updates along the way as we have additional information to share. Today we launched our communication plan, so hopefully you received the school messenger blast with some information about the Academy. It doesn't include a quite lengthy Academy information guide where multiple questions are answered, as well as information for if you have additional questions. We did also include a form where families could submit their name as someone that has some interest and would like to continue to receive information. We are holding a family information night on April 26th. That would be our first one, which will be followed by more in the fall. An exciting opportunity this summer is we have revamped our K-5 summer school program to serve as a bit of a pilot for interdisciplinary student-driven experiences, and so we're excited to partner with our summer school administrator to pilot an experience and do some debriefing with both students and parents that participate in that program. And then as we get further into the fall, spring, and winter, we're really starting to have those conversations about working to solidify the students that have an interest, which will drive our staffing plan, and ideally being in a position where by January of 2023, we have a great idea of which students will be here. We know what those staffing opportunities, we know where we can reallocate and how we can reallocate staff, and be in some of those final stages by January of 2023. And over the summer, host some open houses and excitedly welcome our first class of Academy students in the fall. I didn't put a question slide, but I'll take your questions anyway. Sure.
Can you touch a little bit on the role of problem-based learning and/or project-based learning for Ignite Academy?
Sure. A lot of what we are conceptually working through now is the idea of allowing students to demonstrate proficiency in their reported standards in a manner that is motivating and interesting and relevant to them in their lives. And so a lot of what the teachers and advisors will be doing with the students is establishing some project-based scenarios or some problem-based activities where ideally the student is having some type of real-world application or relevant experience at the end of their learning to be able to see the I guess, impact of their learning and how it can help and expand. A couple examples, we've actually worked with the high school on 2 different projects for the academy already. One was to use the engineering CAD design class to create some of our academy spaces and design them. And the students presented to us as if we were their clients. And the feedback we got from those students was, so my work might actually show up in an academy. What I did actually means something in the real world. The relevance was very motivational for them, and it was interesting to get that feedback. That's the type of experience that we're looking to build into the academy on a more regular basis.
Have you had any discussions with some of the educational liaisons over from Fermilab and or Argonne?
Fermilab, not yet, but they have been recommended to us to have some of those experiences. We are looking to bring in on probably a weekly basis, either outside presenters or speakers, or again, to expose students to as many different things as possible. We have talked about Fermilab being a potential partner for some of the pathway experiences that we're looking to create. That's definitely on our list now. We're walking a little bit of a balance between trying not to get too far into the weeds with those things before we have the actual teachers who will teach those subjects, because we want them to be a part of the creation of that. But yes, I think those are both great resources for us.
Yeah, because speaking of personal experience, we did something like this in Albuquerque in conjunction with Sandia National Laboratories and Los Alamos National Laboratories. Yeah, and they were very helpful in both cases.
Yeah, we've partnered with Fermilab in the past on some after-school exploratory options for students, and they've been very successful and well-received. So I have no doubt that that will be great for us. Thank you.
A quick question about transportation.
Sure.
You said that the kids would be able to still participate in the sports and like arts, you know, I think of band and theater and things like that. Will there be a bus from the academy to here? And you talked about also that their schedule is kind of tentative. Is that, have you kept that in mind too? Obviously, we don't want the kids here too early, you know, if those sports aren't, or we don't want them to arrive too late.
Right. So what I've met with our Director of Transportation, Karen Smith, several times, as well as Dr. Fuchs, to start to work through and process those questions. Inevitably, we always end up with what students will be here and what will they be interested in. What we have committed to is making it work. We will figure that out and we will make it work, and we have the ability to do that. I think that's the foundational commitment. In terms of the specifics, obviously students would be supervised at all times. We've looked at different routes that they could potentially join. Does it make more sense to ride with these routes or a transfer route? We've started digging into our options and have a lengthy list of possibilities that will work. Again, finalizing all of that's going to be dependent on where the students are coming from and who wants to go where. We'll get them where they need to be. We just can't tell you exactly what that will look like just yet, but we're committed to making it happen.
Does that include the middle of the day when band classes might be going on?
Yeah, I think once we have an idea of which students are interested in band, then we have to have that conversation of how many students is it? Does it make sense to have some support brought to the academy to conduct band if we have enough students who are interested? If it's only a handful of students, it might make more sense to transport them. But yes, we've talked about middle of the day transportation if necessary, which actually is easier than before and after school. A lot more flexibility to transport kids during the day. It would just be that time. So again, it would depend on the number of students and if bringing support to them or taking them to the support, whichever makes more sense.
So as a parent, I'm trying to visualize what this might look like for, not that my son's old enough right now, but, right, so teachers aren't bound to a classroom, students aren't bound to times, but we still have 50 in this grade and 100 in this grade, and it just feels like, okay, go wherever you want and somebody will be in that space and they'll find something for you to do.
Well, a little more structured than that. Let me go back to the schedule here. Okay, so students would be assigned to, on this schedule, either a humanities block or a STEM block in the morning. So if you're assigned to Core 1 Humanities, you will have a location that you go to. You will have 2 teachers, if it's humanities, a social studies and an ELA certified teacher, assigned as your instructors or teachers of record for that core block. And so you'll have a group of students that will be assigned to that core block with you. Within that core block, the students who are assigned there with those 2 teachers, that's where they'll have a lot of the conversation of what are your learning goals, what standards are you starting with. These are some recommended prerequisite standards that will build upon, your access for this. So they will have assigned locations that they go to. Within that core block, you can see how long that time period is. The students and teachers will work together of what learning needs to accomplish today, or what are your goals for today or for this week. And it might be, I've got some independent work I need to do, so I'm going to go into the LRC, which is a supervised location where I can maybe do some independent work for a while before signing up for a more directed session with my teacher. But the teachers of record in that humanities core will really be the people guiding those students who are assigned to that block. But students will have a schedule per se that they follow, and then it's the flexibility and the personalization comes within those schedules. So this is essentially what my day would look like as a student. 7:40 to 10:25, I'm in a core block with a part of that being a pathway that I've signed up for. I'm then going to go to an advisory. I'll have a location in a specific advisor that I know I need to go to and go with. My lunch and my connect are next. I know where those things will happen and who my connect person is or how I sign up with that. And then I'll have an assigned core 2 that I go to. Again, within those long core blocks, I might sometimes be working independently. I might sometimes be in a direct instruction lesson with my teacher. I might be working with a small group on a project that, we're going to check in with an advisor. Within those cores will be the flexibility. We've also talked about, with the academy being new, the first 6 weeks are really going to be designed to teach students how to move through this increasingly flexible schedule and how to scaffold students back. So there might be students who are going to need a much deeper level of support initially as they grow to become more comfortable with that environment. But there's still the structure of a school day with flexibility built into each of those structures.
So then, since it's students 4th through 8th grade, are there, like, I'm in 4th, I go here, I'm in 5th, I go here?
There will be a 4th, 5th section of, so if you've been to Meredith, there's a section of the building that currently is utilized by Fox Valley. They're relocating to a different area of the building. 4th and 5th graders through their core blocks will be together, and 6th through 8th through their core blocks will be together. It won't be 4th grade, 5th grade, it'll be 4, 5. And then same thing, it won't be 6, 7, 8, it'll be 6 through 8. With the understanding that there may be students who cross that 5, 6 boundary as well based on their needs, their goals, their whatever their learning proficiency is at the moment. I might go over to the 6, 8 area for a reported standard that I've put on my plan that I want to work on. Vice versa, I might be a 6th grader that's going to pop into with a 5th grade small group and do something. But it'll be more sort of that intermediate level, middle school level.
So there's a fairly big jump between 6th and 8th. So, 6th can work up to 8th, but do your 8th end up hitting a ceiling and not really having anywhere to go? There's this one class and they're trying to mitigate all of those ranges.
Yeah, so that's where the different, learning structures, and so there'll be workshops, there'll be seminars, there'll be direct instruction lessons, there'll be some self-paced opportunities for students. Really, it's going to depend on the needs of those students. The goal is to provide students with whatever instruction and whatever reported standards make sense for where they are in their learning. So we certainly will have students whose pacing is quicker than maybe a typical student, or whose pacing is slower than a typical student. An 8th grade student might be branching out into some 9th grade skills, or we might be reaching out to the high school and looking for some resources to support advancement into some concepts that wouldn't typically be accessible to the middle school level. So really, it's very much going to be based on individualized conversations about what does this student need in their learning right now, and how can we provide them that opportunity or that access.
And then it's once it grows, it's 50 in 9th, 10th. Is it only students that have already been in the program, or can you enter at your 9th, 10th, 11th
Yeah,
grade
you
year?
can enter at any year. We did put a note in the handbook that once you're in, you don't have to apply every year. If that learning environment is working for you, you don't have to worry if I was in for 4th and 5th, will I be in for 6th? Once you're in, you're in until, as long as you want to through your 12th grade year, or as long as it's working for you. We also noted, what's the process if I decide this environment isn't conducive to my type of learning and it isn't meeting my needs? There's a process in the handbook for how that would be handled as well. We also addressed multiple children from one family, and that being difficult for a family if one student's in the academy and another one didn't necessarily get in for, numbers. If one student in the family is in the academy, any students from that family who want to be in, we would accommodate that based on a family, sort of entrance.
So kind of along those lines, and this might be a bit premature, but also optimistic. How easy is it to scale this, do you think? At one point it's kind of a fixed model, but if it becomes really exciting and really catching, how easily can we continue to add to this program and provide more opportunities?
Yeah, I like your optimistic thinking because we're having those same thoughts. The good thing is that personalization is a Kaneland practice. It's not just an academy practice. So we've already started having conversations of, we do have teachers in our traditional settings who are taking personalized learning as deeply as they can within the constraints of the structures. So we've started to talk about what might that look like if we had perhaps one team at the middle school that really wanted to infuse personalization, or a STEM ELA pair in a traditional 4th, 5th setting. What might that look like? We've even talked, there's two teachers that have wanted a hole blown in their wall between their classrooms so that they can collaborate with their students more. And we haven't totally laughed that idea off yet. It might actually not be crazy. So we've started to talk about there are opportunities to take what we're doing at the traditional schools deeper and what that might look like. We've also talked about what's that going to look like as we start to scale up into the high school years, and how certifications and course opportunities might work, and the partnership that would have to develop with the high school too.
So is that the plan then? So
Yeah.
adding after 6, 8, you start adding into the 9?
Yeah, adding 9th so that students who attend their first year as 8th graders would then be able to stay for 9th grade.
Right.
It would give us a few years to work out sort of the graduation, transcript, requirements, those types of things. We do have a partner district who currently has an academy for 9th through 12th graders, so we're watching their progress real carefully and have been able to find out the types of transcripts that they're using, which is a proficiency-based transcript that could potentially work. We've also visited several high schools in Wisconsin through the Institute for Personalized Learning, and they've been great resources on what does this look like on a graduation track. So we feel like we've got the ideas in place, and the scaling up one grade level at a time will allow us to move at a pace that allows us to bring those things in.
Excellent. Thank you.
My only last comment would be on your interest, and I feel like I'm somebody that doesn't see the traditional classroom, but I can't conceptualize this, and so if I'm a parent coming to an interest night, it's got to be dumbed down 20 more levels and really walked through what does this look like on a day-to-day.
That is good feedback, because we have that parent night coming up, and we've adjusted this PowerPoint to make it a little bit more specific for that audience, but thank you for that. And there is the handbook, which was emailed out to everyone today, which definitely gives a greater depth of information. It's, I think, just over 20 pages of sort of question answer, and hopefully that will give a lot more information too. And again, we'll continue with the board updates as we progress, and make sure that we continue to build that understanding. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. In addition to other board updates, next week, I was going to wait for the superintendent report, but I'll just add it now. Next week on Wednesday, we have our facility planning meeting. It'll be over at Meredith, and Laura will be there also for a similar presentation, be able to answer questions. And then next Thursday, the 21st, we have CAC, and CAC will also be at Meredith to continue this dialogue and share with our families and get additional feedback from them. So both the facilities planning committee from the facility side, and then the CAC will also hopefully give us valuable feedback and get more information. Both of those dates will still follow. And then also in May, the Aurora Education Commission meets monthly. That's a consortium of early childhood through health services, through the education in the Aurora area, meets monthly in Aurora at the City Hall meeting, and has asked Laura to come and present in May, much more truncated. They give us about 14 minutes. So in 14 minutes, Laura will provide a similar update. So Laura and I can begin to work on how we're going to get that down to 14 minutes. But
No questions.
thank you, Laura.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we don't have any action on that one. We'll move on to the COVID-19 mitigation plan update.
Yes, and there's, thank you, no action on this one either. And as you saw in the memo, there are no new recommendations for the plan. We are thankful that our numbers continue to stay low, and Dr. Fuchs and I and Dr. Atkins continue to monitor them daily, look at the numbers. Also, I'm happy to share that based on the consistency over the last few weeks, it was nice to see our data last week, the week after spring break, actually being slightly better than the week prior to spring break. Because I know after breaks, over the last 2 years, we've tended to fear Thanksgiving break, Christmas break, spring breaks, those types of breaks. So it's great to see everything stay stable without any recommendations to the plan. Also, based on the current stability, we have discontinued the Monday 1 o'clock meetings with the Kane County Health Department. So we saw that as a success, as a required meeting, not required, but a recommended meeting that we've had for about 1.5 years to discontinue that meeting regularly, but also know that the Kane County Health Department will still provide resources should we need something moving forward. And then the last piece, Dr. Fuchs and I are in works trying to determine the shield testing and test to stay as we do that weekly and daily now. Continue that until such time, probably the week before the end of the school year, or based on what's happening into the last week of the school year if needed, but we'll look at what's going on case rate wise, how things are going on in the schools, and then make that decision and make sure we communicate that to our families, because we still have a number of families that are utilizing that and want to make sure that they have enough planning or enough time in advance.
So I have a quick question.
Yes.
How useful is the data on cases? Because it's now, using home tests, and there's not like, it's, people aren't going to a central location where they actually report the cases. So it's kind of an honor system reporting thing, so is it really relevant?
That's the challenging piece, because you're right, even the CDC shifted from the case rates to hospitalizations. We don't utilize hospitalizations, so we've used case rates for the last 1.5 years now, basically 2 years. So we've just continued with that because that's what we have and that's known. But we would use that in conjunction with the health department. If case rates were higher, we would take that to the health department, talk with them, and then they would help us with what the relative value of case rates is for our district.
Okay. Thanks. It
You're
just
welcome.
seems like at some point it might be futile to report cases because
Right.
you don't really know, you're reporting numbers of a few that you hear about,
Yes.
but then there may be many others that you don't. So,
And I'm sure Dr.
Something
Fuchs
to
would be
think
happy
about.
to say, yes, let's stop reporting because of the amount of time that it takes. But Dr. Fuchs, you're about to share.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, with regard to students, we know when they're absent, and our nurses have been diligent about exploring their symptoms. And if they are COVID-like symptoms, we do require that negative test in order to return. We may not be hitting all of them that are positive in terms of reporting. We think we're getting most of them because of our practices and the importance of keeping all children safe. I think families have been better about if their children are sick to keep them home. So in terms of community-wide spread and things like that, we may not have a solid understanding because we may have a good understanding of the students in the home, but we don't know who else in the home might be positive.
Right.
So, great question.
But it is good to know that we have that extra layer, the nurses, that we're getting
Yeah.
some data.
We're hopeful that at the end of the school year, maybe we won't need to do the daily reporting. We'll see how it's going and how many new variants.
Hopefully none. Okay, so that concludes new business.
Yes.
So now we're on the superintendent and board report.
Yes, first, several updates. The first one, just a reminder that on the 18th of April, next Monday, it's a no student attendance day. It's a SIP day. Also, next, as you can see, the stage is starting to transform into the spring musical. Our next meeting on Monday, the 25th, we will re-meet back in the 6th grade team room, a little bit of a reunion where we used to meet. We'll still stay here with the technology and the microphones and the cameras rather than going to a different building. So it still will be here at Harder, but back in the 6th grade team room. And it's also a part of that meeting, just as a reminder, that that is the meeting for the annual reorganization for board office positions and committees that we have a board member represented on, which is the Insurance Committee and the Hall of Fame. So that'll be at the next meeting on April 25th. Also at the next meeting, we'll hopefully have finally at least a preliminary update on REV, which is based on the equity audit. We are finally having our CAC representative Wednesday at our administrative team meeting, and then also plan to share that update with CAC next Thursday on the 21st. Hall of Fame, I provide updates for the Hall of Fame, just so a large and major reminder, next year is the 25th anniversary, so the Hall of Fame committee is hard at work with multiple events for next year, knowing that in the fall may not be the best time for certain people to travel. There'll be multiple opportunities. There's going to be a fall event, a winter event, and then a spring event surrounding both athletics and activities to try to make sure that we capture all of our Hall of Fame inductees to come back to acknowledge them. Also, in the next couple weeks, you will see and hear some information I did share previously with the board about the renaming of Meredith. So we're going to do some work to come up with some information to send out to families with possible ideas, possible naming conventions, naming structures, bring that information, tally that, and then put a committee together to look at those possible options for renaming of Meredith, and then eventually bring that to the board. So the nice thing is it already has a name, so it's not like it's an emergency or something urgent we have to do right away. We'll take our time and make sure that we have enough feedback and input from others to be able to do that. Also, an update at the next meeting, you'll see in the consent agenda the final calendar for the 21-22 school year, which is this school year. We usually wait till after spring break. As you've seen, there's some snow flurries every now and then. Hopefully it's nothing that would ever cause an emergency day, but we still typically wait till the second meeting in April, and then you would just see that we're adding the 2 days, the 19th and the 20th of May, to conclude the school year. If you have any questions on that, you can always ask me, but that would go in the consent because it's a perfunctory duty and task. Also, just so that you know, as you know and you've seen and heard, we've had a number of questions on standards-based grading. We do have an update plan that we're going to bring back to the board on May 23rd as the school year concludes. Just an update on where we are exactly today, what the plans are for the summer, and then what it will look like going into the fall, and be able to provide more information. And then also in June, just down the road, because these are topics for future agendas that we've either created or the board shared with us, we will also provide an update on the homeroom planning for next fall for grades 6 through 12 as we work towards implementation of that.
Okay.
Questions? I know Dr. Fuchs, thank you. I know Dr. Fuchs has 3 or 4 that she also wanted to touch on.
I was just going to say, quick question about the standard-based grading presentation. Will it include, will there ever be a survey, students, their voice, parents, their voice too, teachers? just kind of get a glimpse of, like, a snapshot of what's going well for them, what's not going well. Just those three areas.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Anything else for me?
Nope.
Dr. Fuchs?
Dr. Layden, you had mentioned that Monday there's no school for the school improvement day. I also want to add to that, there's no school on Friday. It is a non-attendance day, but because of the way the calendar fell, our full year or 12-month employees will be reporting to work unless if they take some sort of vacation or personal day. But there's also no school Friday too. FAC will be meeting Thursday night. The Finance Advisory Committee will meet at 7 o'clock in the district office. If you're interested, please come and join us. This afternoon, our security task force team had a great field trip at what's going to be our reunification site. At this time, we're not necessarily sharing the site, but we visited the site and identified if we ever had to evacuate a school and reunify students with their parents, the process that we would use to do that. In December, we had, I think if you'll remember, I had mentioned we had brought in a speaker and an organization in combination with, I think it was 10 other school districts in the county and local area. We're continuing our learning and implementation of that. And so today we visited the site and identified where parents would park, where staff would park, how kids would get reunified. And so we'll be sharing more information and more details, but I felt that it was a very valuable experience and our hosts were very generous. So I think we're moving in the right direction if we ever need to do that. Capital projects. We are, as you know, we're bidding, we're getting ready for summer of 2022. As you may also know, the economy is still a little bit unstable in the sense that pricing and materials, supply chain issues, lots of barriers at this point. Mark Payton has requested that we completely move up our capital projects process. We would typically bring that to you in late November so that you could approve it in December so that we could get ready for summer. He is suggesting that we move that to this spring yet, bring you the list, the recommendations in May so that we can start moving forward in June for summer of '23. Unless if the board expresses a desire not to do that, I also support it and recommend it so that we can be sure that any projects that we want to do can get done during that short window of June, July, and August when the kids aren't in school. And so please plan on that. We're working on identifying, we're revisiting our priority list, which you know is quite lengthy, to decide how we can move forward. We know that we've simultaneously are working on the high school facility plan, getting that moving forward. So we have a lot of knowns, a lot of unknowns, but we still have to keep moving while we're planning and preparing.
So on that, budgetarily, would even though we move it up, the money would still come from the next fiscal year?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. And what we would, right now, what I would intend to do is ask for the $1 million that we've been able to sustain over time. And then should we be able to afford more, we can do that, anytime. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we wouldn't have to do less because the projects that we need to complete, we need them. Mm-hmm. So there's a push-pull there. So that does lead me into my last topic. We have a a one-time opportunity that isn't necessarily time-sensitive. Our bond and interest fund has grown over time. There's 2 reasons why it's grown. One, it earns interest when money is sitting waiting to pay our bonds. And 2, in King County every year, they know how much our bond payments are, so that's how much they give us, but they also add 1%. And that 1% is so that in case of some of the tax money doesn't come in, the school district can still make their bond payments. Well, that money has grown somewhere around $1 million. And so I've been working with PMA. I have a call this week to learn more. There are a number of steps that have to happen, but we may be able to use that money to support our capital projects. As you know, we've got some pretty big ones at the top of the list. And so that might also give you some comfort in doing some capital project planning sooner than the board would normally do it. Again, all of that bond and interest information has to come through the board. We need to have the public engagement. Again, it's not just going to happen because I say, hey, let's do this. There's a legal process that we will have to go through. But I at least wanted to put that in your ear so that you would say, oh yeah, I remember her talking about that when it becomes time. We want to make sure that when we bring that to you, that we can tell you how we would use that money, and we're not quite there yet. We have ideas, but which one makes most sense? We're trying to make sure we make the best decision possible.
Does that require, like, public hearings and all that? Okay.
Public notice, public hearings.
Yep.
The works.
The works, okay.
Yep. That's all that I have for tonight, so thank you very much.
Okay, I did have one thing, economic interest statements, due May 1st. There are substantial penalties for not getting it in, so get it in. You should have gotten an email if you didn't. Let Dr. Layden know, and
We can make the
we're
connection.
trying to figure it out, because we do have at least one board member that didn't get the email from the county. So.
President, I just have one thing. I just wanted to say thanks to all of our presenters tonight. I know we had a long list of them, did an awesome job, so I appreciate them. If they're still here, if not, I just have thanks to the recorders.
Thank you.
I concur. Okay. Nothing else from other board members? Are we good? If so, topics for future agendas. Are we
Just
good?
wanted to follow up on the one that I mentioned months ago about the student. I know we've talked to some, put it back on your radar, just in case.
Yeah, no, it's been great. I've collected 3 or 4 ideas from 3 or 4 other districts. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that together and then come back to the board and share some of the ideas and options so that we have it done in time for, based on what the board wants to do and takes action to do, possible inclusion for next year in whatever form we decide.
Excellent, thank you.
And just to, you kind of said part of the phrase, and I don't think it was actually, the full thing didn't come out what that is. It's for student representation on the
Sorry,
board.
I need to cut you off. Sorry.
Yeah,
I knew what you were thinking. Sorry, I should have waited.
So,
Yeah, so the student
So
representative.
that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, student representative on the board.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Other topics? Anything? Okay. Is there a sign-up sheet for public comment? No, there are no public comments. So I'll open it up to the floor. Are there any public comments? Okay, hearing none. We do have an executive session tonight to discuss the following. We're going to discuss collective negotiating under 2C2, student disciplinary cases under 2C9, litigation under 2C11, and employment under 2C1. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn, or to convene in, to adjourn to executive session. Wow.
So moved. Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mrs. Simmons.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt?
Aye.
Mrs. Junk?
Aye.
Dr. Lawler?
Aye.
Mr. Mankivsky?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. And
We'll be in the community room.
there won't be any action taken afterwards, so after this vote, the recording of tonight's meeting is concluded.